217, I'm back, living life. Welcome to 2021. So this video's I did this just after Christmas, this video, but putting it out there in the future. So that's why there may be some topic timeline differences. Anyway, I want to say Happy New Year to everybody. Cats are going crazy, enjoying life. Today what I'm going to talk about, an interesting topic, because I got this question asked to me by one of my followers, and I want to say thank you to everyone who is subscribing, commenting, viewing. I love it. I've been doing this now just over a year and a half, and I'm really having fun. And the thing I like the most is when my viewers send me comments. Whether it be on my Instagram, my Facebook, or even on YouTube. I had one guy who's here in Seoul, and he was shocked that I replied back to him. I guess not a lot of YouTubers will do that. But I'm still a small channel, so, I have the time to reply to as many comments as possible. I don't get a lot, but hey, the few that I do, I try to comment on every single comment I get. Anyway, so today I'm going to talk about a very interesting, maybe sensitive subject, is gangsters in Korea. Mafia, Yakuza, whatever you want to call it. Gangs. Are there? And if so, what are they like? Well, I'll tell you this. From my personal experience, what have I experienced, and what have I seen, and what have I read in the news, and what have friends told me? Friends who live here in Korea. Not friends, sorry. Koreans who live here in Korea. So the all-around answer is, yes, there are gangsters in Korea. Are they the same kind that we are used to seeing on TV, or mafia or gangs or mobsters, or what have you? And the number one answer is no. It is nothing like what you've seen on TV or what you think you know from America or Europe or whatever. Now, there's K-dramas that glorify the gangster life, and it's somewhat like that, but that is the extreme. Let's just take a step back and talk about this. In most countries, the criminal element, the organized criminal element, is based, it's all money, but where is that money? And it's drugs, prostitution, gambling, the vices, those kinds of things, loan sharking and stuff like that. Here in Korea, because of drugs being highly illegal, you're not going to find the criminal element involved in that a lot. Now, I don't know from personal experience because I've never dealt with that, but it's not something that I have heard or seen. Obviously, they're involved in it, but not to the level where it's a risk. So it's easier for them to manage the loan sharking and the prostitution and the gambling. Those are less, I don't want to say less enforced, but it's easier to get away with than drugs. So prostitution, gambling, loan sharking, that kind of thing. Those I've heard about, those I've seen. Gambling, all over the place. Loan sharking, 100%. 100%. Prostitution, absolutely. Prostitution is a funny thing here in Korea because it is not legal, but it is everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. And it's controlled. So how do I know about this? Well, now here goes the story of why we're going to talk about it today. The reason I know about this is because I know some gangsters. And let me tell you the story, all right? So coming up on 12 years, this spring, 2021, I'll be here 12 years. When I first came to Korea, I hung out in Itaewon, and I was hanging out at a foreign bar, and I met a Korean, and he introduced me to other Koreans. And at that time, a lot of Koreans would come to Itaewon to avoid other Koreans. So I met a lot of famous people, and in amongst that crowd were the Gangsters. Now, I don't know who these people were. I don't understand the culture. I'm brand new to the country. So I met these guys, really nice. They're older. They were my age-ish. At that time, I was 40. So they were around my age. They were a little bit older or my age. And these guys were well-dressed, cultured, and they seemed to, well, they were rich, right? I mean, it was very obvious. And they had a sense of power, but they didn't have an entourage. Not like you see in the movies, where these guys in the black suits and then all of their minions, No, wasn't like that. So I got taken to clubs and bars and stuff like that, and then my friend, let's call him Mr. H. This was a Korean guy I knew, who was the guy who connected me with everyone. He knew everyone. He was like what I am today. He knew everyone and everyone knew him. So he was the go-to guy at the time. So that's how he knew. So I got connected to Mr. S. And he was a really fun guy. Didn't speak any English. I remember the first time I met him. And I became like a pet, I'm gonna say. I don't know what it was. But he liked me. And I remember I got a phone call the next weekend from him, and no English. I don't speak Korean. So he put his friend on. It turns out this was his cousin or something like that. And his cousin spoke a little English and asked me what I was doing and where I was. And in Korean style, people will call you last minute to go and hang out. So you always got to be dressed and ready. So I happened to be out, and they said, we'll pick you up and meet me here, blah, blah, blah. So they pull up, and we end up going in a car and somewhere in Gangnam and drinking and partying all night long, and girls and drinks and places. We went from one place to another for food and drinks, and not clubs or anything like that. It was more like restaurants and bars and lounges, and I don't remember. It was so long ago. What are the cats doing? They're so excited. It's morning, right? So it's morning. It's time for them to play. Anyway, ended up going to a sauna. Now, Korean sauna, you're naked and everything like that. So I noticed that because he was always dressed like a businessman. So again, because I don't speak Korean, and it wasn't like more like we were talking, it's just more we're hanging out and just having fun. I never really got to know what he did. But he was dressed like a businessman, always in a suit, shirt and tie, and he had that air about him. But then I noticed that he had some tattoos on his body and in his private area. And I was like, that was really confusing for me, because I wasn't into tattoo culture at that time. Okay? And I didn't understand it. But it wasn't like the Japanese Yakuza or the LA gangs or something like that. It was, I'm not going to get into details about it because that's private. I'm just going to say I saw tattoos where I haven't noticed tattoos before, and I saw a style that I never noticed before. So I went to Mr. H, my friend, and I asked him about it. And he's like, oh, well, you didn't know. And I'm like, what do you mean? You didn't know? Well, he's a gangster. He's a chopo. That's Korean for gangster. I'm like, really? He says, yeah. And this is where I started learning about who and what they are. They're basically not in Seoul. They're more in the southern areas where the port cities are. Busan, Mokpo, Sokcho, all along the coast. And in the factory cities where a lot of workers are, because that's where they do the loan sharking and prostitution and gambling. In Seoul, it's much more difficult from what I've heard because of the police crackdown. Less people, less police, more people, more police. And it's being run by, bigger and bigger gangs or stuff like that. So that's where you see the movies where you got these like 40 or 50 guys and the big boss coming in the car and all the people bowing and everything like that. But the funny thing is at one time I did experience that. I'm with Mr. S, and he introduces me to his boss. I didn't know it at the time, but I figured it out because, everybody's bowing to this guy, and very quiet, never said a word. It was a unique situation, a unique experience for me, looking back on it. And, one of the times I remember I was at a I don't want to say club, but it was clubbish. There was a dance floor, and I'm the only foreigner. Now you have to remember, this is like 12 years ago, 11 years ago. I was the only foreigner in the whole room, and I'm brown. And I'm not speaking Korean. I'm just partying and having a good time with, there was probably about 10 of us, about 5 girls, 4 girls, and then us guys, his friends, and we're at a table, we're drinking, and I'm dancing with the girls, and somebody bumps into me, so I turn and move away a little bit. Same position, somebody bumps me again from behind. I turn around and I look, it's some Korean guy, young Korean guy looking at me. So I just turn around and I move to the other side. I don't want to get involved in anything in Korea. Number one rule in Korea, never get into a fight with a Korean. That's number one. Turn around and run away. Just like in Thailand, never, okay? It's not worth your visa. So I turn around and away, and then he walks up to me, and at this point, Mr. H, my friend, sees what's happening. He walks up and he talks to the guy. And they're kind of like face to face, just like, and the other guy is just like, like trying to be all big and stuff. Mr. H just stops, looks at me, and just shakes his head, and he goes to the guy. He goes, "Look, something like this." I can kind of figure out what he was saying, but he was basically saying, "Hey, look, this guy over here, he's a friend of Mr. S." So the kid looks at me, looks at Mr. S, who's the gangster, looks at me, and looks at my friend Mr. H, and just like starts bowing. And starts bowing to me and backing away, bowing and backing away. Bowing to everybody and backing away. It was the funniest, most surreal thing I have ever seen in my life. And that's a funny story. Anyway, in the West, gangsters target poor people and stuff like that, and protection money and things like that. They rob. Here in Korea, that doesn't happen, although I don't know. I've never seen it. Korea is a prosperous country, so when it's prosperous and there's social platforms for people, you don't have a lot of robbery. Due to Corona, robbery has gone up. But traditionally, it doesn't happen. So I have not seen that. It's more the vices. That's where they importing goods tax-free, exporting goods tariff-free, smuggling, prostitution, gambling, loan sharking, those kinds of things. That's what I've heard, and I haven't seen it. Well, I've seen things, but I'm not going to comment on those. But this is what is the reality in Korea. Your traditional gangster that you see on TV or that you know about from your own home country doesn't exist here. And especially guns. It just doesn't exist. Knives, absolutely. Absolutely. I knew guys with cuts all over and the scars, and this is from fights. Because they do the knife thing here. They do the knife thing. So that's my story. I want everybody to stay safe. Itaewon Semi, living the COVID life. I'm out.